Welcome, the Film and Page. I'm Dominic. So in this video, I'm going to be talking about copyright issues again. In the last video, it was an article that was for long-term copyrights and why it's a good thing and stuff like that. And I didn't really agree very much with that article. Now there were some areas where I was kind of on the fence about some stuff, but now this article I'm going to be looking at here now is actually for looser copyright laws. So it's kind of like the opposite of the last article that I covered. And it is, I think, from 2018, this article. It's a little bit newer than the last one I talked about. And this one is, what if Star Trek were free? How the storied sci-fi franchise could inspire copyright reform. Even after 7 television series and 13 movies, Star Trek's existence is always precarious. The failure of a show like Star Trek Enterprise, saved once from cancellation after its 2nd season, kept Star Trek off television for a generation. Now, with Discovery airing behind the CBS All-Access paywall, it's the Star Trek movie series that has the uncertain future. Mainstream sci-fi, the kind that can compete with Guardians of the Galaxy or The Expanse, is expensive. Variety pegs Star Trek Discovery's budget at more than $8 million per episode. Even with a reliable audience and cultural ubiquity that approaches folklore, Star Trek can't always find a market. But what if economics no longer mattered? What if, instead, Star Trek was free? In 2014, Axanar Productions released Prelude to Axanar, a 20-minute full Federation documentary on a war with the Klingon Empire, produced as proof of concept for a feature-length fan film. A few months after the blockbuster crowdfunding campaign, Axanar became the target of a copyright lawsuit from Paramount. So yeah, if you don't know, Axanar these guys crowdfunded a movie, basically. They're going to make a Star Trek movie, and it looked really good, actually. And now it's kind of a complicated story, but they were getting sued by Paramount. And I don't think it's necessarily because they were doing crowdfunding, but I think what kind of broke the straw that broke the camel's back is they were starting to sell Axanar merchandise, and that was a very clear violation of copyright. And there's a lot more to that Axanar story, because there's actually the person behind Axanar got into some kind of a feud with Robert Meyer Burnett, who was actually working on that fan film. So that's a whole other story. But this kicked off a big fan backlash against Paramount. Historically, the way Star Trek and Disney and so on, the way that they work is that they pretend they don't see the stuff they like. So then they don't have to worry about trademark dilution. And then they destroy anything that upsets them in some tiny way. Science fiction author Walkaway, Little Brother Pirate Simona, and technology activist Cory Doctorow told Player One, "This is not a great way to influence a culture." Axanar Productions settled in 2017 after the PR firestorm encroached upon pre-release hype for Star Trek Beyond. J.J. Abrams and director Justin Lin gave comment, forcing a consequential response from CBS and Paramount, official guidelines for future fan films. So I can remember when this was happening, this was really bad PR for Paramount, because a lot of fans really like doing these films. They're very passionate about Star Trek, and I've watched a few fan films in my day, and some of them are, pretty bad. There's some bad ones out there, but there's some pretty good ones too. There's actually some really good fan films out there. And now I remember a lot of people were not happy about those new guidelines. These guidelines state CBS and Paramount Pictures are big believers in reasonable fan fiction and fan creativity, and in particular want amateur fan filmmakers to showcase their passion for Star Trek. But dig a little deeper and the rules strongly suggest otherwise, limiting fan films to 15 minutes, codifying loopholes around terms like offensive and unreasonable, insisting on officially licensed merchandise, and banning appearances from former Star Trek cast members. The official guidelines for avoiding objections illustrate how copyright holders foster public enthusiasm and creativity only to the extent of their advantage. The erroneous guidelines are already widely controverted. including by ongoing fan productions. Fan Film Factor counted 60 fan films in the 8 months after the guidelines were released. The predicted chilling effect never came, but the existence of the guidelines inspire a simple question: what makes CBS and Paramount Pictures the best arbiters of a creative response to Star Trek? Now, the funny thing about that is Paramount started to compete, well, because these fan films were getting so good that you almost had like an alternate Star Trek competing with Paramount's and CBS's Star Trek. In a lot of cases, it was more faithful to Star Trek and it was actually better. And I think they were kind of getting worried that they were actually facing competition. The default answer is simple. Existing copyright law under the first copyright law in the United States, the Man Trap, and most of Star Trek's first season would have entered the public domain in 1994. Reforms in 1909 pushed that to 2022. In 1976 to 2041, currently episodes of Star Trek won't enter the public domain until after 2060. And all these reforms were pushed by big corporations. I think the first one might have been Disney, because Mickey Mouse was about to slip in the public domain. So these were always more or less just to benefit the corporations, so they can hold on and like milk these properties longer and longer. The Adelphi Charter on Creativity, Innovation, and Intellectual Property, issued in 2004 by the UK's Royal Society of Arts, offers a prescriptive rebuttal. Rather than limiting competition on behalf of rights holders, the Adelphi Charter proposed reforming intellectual property laws, itself a term tailored to copyright holders' advantage, equating creative expression with sellable goods. Humanity's capacity to generate new ideas and knowledge is its greatest asset. It is the source of art, science, innovation, and economic development. Without it, individuals and societies stagnate. This creative imagination requires access to the ideas, learning, and culture of others, past and present, and in the future others will use what we have done. That sounds a little closer to Star Trek, a speculative utopian future that wouldn't limit its horizon on possibility to the status quo, or let profit motive bound human creativity. But even under the assumptions of global capital, Paramount and CBS would benefit by loosening their grip on Star Trek. There is an instrumental argument to be made for this, which is Star Trek lives or dies by its fandom, quite literally. It was cancelled, and it was only brought back because the fans, who were already writing fan fiction about it, were so enthusiastic that they actually brought the show back from the dead. It's kind of the UR story of how shows do come back from the dead when their fans love them. Doctorow, one of the signatories of the Adelphi Charter, said, "So telling your fans not to love your material so much that they tell their own stories in it, it's not a winning strategy. At worst, they'll take you at your word and cease to care so passionately about the thing you depend on them to keep alive." That's a very, very good point. Very good point. Because when that just shows how much fans love these properties. When you're going to spend and a lot of these fan films, they don't make money from these fan films. A lot of these guys that do them, they just do it. I don't honestly, some of them, I don't know how they afford them, some of the guys, but they somehow can do it, and they make them, and you know that shows how much they love the show. And Star Trek literally lives and dies by its fans. And that was just one of like many future PR blunders with Star Trek under CBS, was that whole thing with Annexer, and the whole restriction of fan films. Like, fans really didn't like that. That pushed a lot of fans away. And I think this even holds true now that we've gotten a couple seasons of Discovery and now Star Trek Picard. Now, I know there's fans of both those shows. I know there's fans of Star Trek Discovery and Star Trek Picard. And that's fine, but like, just in my personal opinion, I think those shows could have been way better than what they actually were, and those shows have, I mean, whether you like it or not, whether you're a fan of discovering them or not, I mean, I don't think it's an unreasonable argument to say that those new shows pushed a lot of fans away. And, a lot of the way the creatives responded to fans pushed fans away. They were almost like intentionally, especially when they're marketing Discovery, it's almost like they were trying to push fans' buttons and stuff by it. And and the fans, some of these fan films were a lot better than the writing on them were a lot better than what Discovery was. And that's what it is. You're one step at a time. You're killing fan enthusiasm. You're killing, you're pushing your fans away because of this kind of stuff. Ryan Merkley is CEO of Creative Commons, a nonprofit offering legal tools for creators to share their work through more permissive copyright licenses. He believes freer access to Star Trek would open up new possibilities, not just for fans, but for Paramount and CBS. All intellectual property has value, and the obvious one that you can create with it is financial value by restricting access to it in exchange for money. But there's other value you can create, Merkel told Newsweek. He believes simpler or free legal structures are key. You can create stronger and more vibrant communities by inviting other people to build on top of that original property, not by selling access. You get that by inviting collaboration. That's what sparks passion. And here's the other thing too, Discovery. When Discovery came out, they really pushed how the empowering character that Michael Burnham was going to be for women of color, and how this was going to be. They wanted to make a character that women of color can look up to and all that, and how empowering it is. But don't you dare make a fan film. You know what I mean? It's like they don't really mean it. It just makes them sound like they're full of crap. Like all this is just PR spin, the whole empowering thing. Like if they really wanted to empower people. Now, I mean, I'm not a big fan of Star Trek Discovery, but I know there are fans of that show. I know that there are people that really like that show, and I'm sure there are fans out there that would love to make fan films of Discovery. And there are, women of color out there that would love to portray Michael Burnham in a fan film. So how more empowering could you get than that? You know what I mean? So, it's kind of it's like, these big corporations and all that, they preach all this stuff, but they don't really mean it. At the end of the day, they don't really care. It's all they care about is lining their pockets. But I mean, you can still line your pockets and still, and this would foster your fan base. CBS and Paramount are unlikely to see things the same way. While Star Trek Discovery press releases trumpet the ideology and hope for the future that inspired a generation of dreamers and doers, plans for streaming market domination depend on exclusivity. The metaphor equating artistic expression and poverty has become so ingrained that companies regularly reduce their customers to provisional licensees, subject to whatever controls the copyright holder decides on, even long after the point of purchase. Star Trek stands on the shoulders of giants. It exists because they plundered some of the most interesting stories and memes of science fiction, just as all science fiction writers do, to tell their own story, and argue that when they did it, that was a legitimate process of art, and whenever anyone else does it, it's theft, is pretty self-serving and kind of obviously bullshit, Doctorow said. It's a ridiculous thing for a law to ban something that ancient and fundamental to how we experience art. And that's another good point. If you do it, it's theft. Now, I know you got to have some copyright protection. I'm not a complete fool, but and the thing about it is, if Star Trek was in the public domain, just say Star Trek was in the public domain, there's still nothing stopping from, CBS still making Star Trek. They could still make the Star Trek shows they wanted. But what would be interesting, how that would look if movie studios competed against each other with the same movie. Like, how would that, if take Star Wars. Okay, when Star Wars The Force Awakens came out, Disney said, okay, here's our trilogy. But they had to compete with, Universal's Star Wars trilogy. and Paramount's Star Wars trilogy. You know what I mean? That would be an interesting thing if the world was set up like that, where similar IPs had to companies had to compete with making their IPs. They got to make the same stories, but they had to compete with the other companies. So they all had to compete. Okay, well, no, which Star Wars movie are you going to see? You got 3 versions of Star Wars movie. Universal puts out their Star Wars movie, Episode 7, and Disney, and then now they have to compete. That would probably change a lot. You wouldn't get such lazy, sloppy writing, because they would know, well, we really got to make sure our Star Wars movie is really good, because we're competing against 2 other Star Wars films coming out this year. It would be interesting. It would be like if 3 companies made like a Hercules movie, and they all came out around the same summer. They would all have to compete against each other. I mean, that already happens with stuff like that. I mean, there's times where, people make like a bunch of Dracula movies or something like that, and they still have to, then they have to make sure their version of Dracula is more appealing than the competitor's version of Dracula. And this is pretty long, and it keeps going on. So I'm going to stop it right there. I'm not going to go the whole way down, but you kind of get the gist of what they're going for with this article. Now, what do I think of all this? Yeah, I definitely think copyright. I got some interesting comments in the last video I did on this, where companies are going so overboard with their copyright, because I remember, and I forgot about this till the person mentioned it in the comments section, is that DC and Marvel wanted to copyright the word superhero. So only they could use that phrase. And Warhammer 40K wanted to copyright Space Marine. So like these very generic terms that everyone uses, they want to copyright like all these expressions of language. Like, that's going too far with copyright. And it's just going to choke the life out of creativity. And now Disney is brutal with their copyright. I can remember hearing stories. Now this goes back a long ways. I'm not sure when I heard about this, but I think it was either like late 90s or early 2000s. I remember this news story about Disney. Now this would not have gone over today, because there was no social media really when I heard this story, but it did get covered in the news, of Disney suing daycares. Okay, now daycares, because inside the daycare, someone painted Disney characters like Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck up on the walls. And they sued daycares. Places that take care of kids. Like, that, to me, is going way too far, and that town sounds completely scummy. For one, they're not making any financial gain off of those characters being up on the wall. Like, so why do that? That just makes your company look like an absolute and utter bully. And then there was a story not too long ago about a father who wanted to put Spider-Man on his son's headstone, and Disney wouldn't allow it. And that didn't make them look good at all. Like, it was just like terrible stuff like that. But yeah, I've heard stories about it. Like, Disney is very, very super protective, very vicious when it comes to copyright. And that's the one thing I think. One thing I liked about George Lucas is he seemed like he really encouraged fan films of Star Wars. And CBS could do this, Paramount could do this now. Like, why not encourage fan films? Like, instead of trying to slap them down. Like, why not, have a contest? Throw that, just for pure PR purposes, and just for goodwill with the fans. Have a fan film contest, and whoever wins the most money, or whoever wins the contest, their fan film goes on the DVD extras of the next season of Star Trek Discovery or whatever, right? Anything like that. I mean, they basically could have people creating content, Star Trek content for them for like nickels, dimes. Paramount could, because the fans could just raise the money themselves, make the content, and then Paramount could still benefit somehow, even financially from it. There's a much better way of doing it. Like, they're just thinking short term. They're thinking short term greed. Like, they're not thinking even though you could even capitalize. There's a way to capitalize on fan films if you had the right idea, or you had the right mindset. These companies, where they're thinking like two-dimensional or something. They're not thinking outside the box when it comes to fan films. And yeah, I have to agree 100% with this article. I think it hits nail right on the head. And Cory Doctorow, that author, I think he's pretty bang on with this. With the copyright, definitely could be loosened up, especially for fan films and things like that. And I'll just say that before I go, as a little, just kind of like off topic, but the author Cory Doctorow, if you want to check out one of his stories, he actually gave away put one of his stories for free on the internet. One of his first stories I ever read used to be in like a sci-fi group where they would do like a book club meetup. So once a month we'd pick a different book. So the one book we picked was Cory Doctorow's book. We all was able to read it for free because he put it out online for free as a PDF. And I believe the story was Down and Out in the Magic Kingdom. It was a weird sci-fi movie weird sci-fi story where like Disney owned the whole world. Everyone worked for Disney, and you didn't have money. Your currency was social media likes. So the more likes you got, that like somehow got turned into money. And then if you got social media dislikes, like you lost money. It was a weird story, but it was a good sci-fi story. So that's one you could probably find that for free online still. That was if you wanted something, to kill time while you're stuck in the house because of COVID. Again, I totally agree with this article. So that's everything I got to say in this video. Let me know what you think in the comments section, and I will see you at the next one. I'd like to say thank you to all of my subscribers. I appreciate you all in helping this channel grow. If you're new to the channel, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Also, don't forget to hit the bell icon so you'll be notified when new videos are uploaded.